Great. Oh, I'll just take that off, otherwise that's a bit distracting. So we're really excited and privileged to have Donna Hall join us today. She's been described as a public sector pioneer and was awarded a CBE in 2009 for innovation, and also awarded as a transformational leader in 2017 by the Northern Power Women Awards. She was the CEO of Wigan Council for 8 years and developed and delivered alongside her teams the Wigan Deal. She's made significant contributions to many national think tanks, to NHS trusts, social enterprises, and was appointed an honorary professor at the University of Manchester in politics. She is currently advising on the work regarding integrated care systems to the NHS England. So without further ado, Donna, please, we're really excited to hear what you have to talk to us about today. Thanks.
Oh, thanks very much, Jane, and it's lovely to see you all and to be here at lunchtime. And how committed are you if you eat into your lunchtime? And please feel free to eat and relax. And I like meetings like this, they're quite relaxed but productive, if that's okay. And feel free to challenge what I say, to disagree, or to think about, ask very practical questions about how to do it in Coventry and Warwickshire. I love the title of your group as well. Grapevine, connecting people, but also thinking and doing. And I see a lot of people at the moment doing lots of thinking, but I'll be honest, in this space around community empowerment and community power, not much actual doing. And obviously the pandemic, necessity driven, meant that we did unlock lots of community power as public servants, but it's important that we don't go back to the way that we used to work, and I can see that happening. So I'm not sure if people are aware of the Wigan Deal, but I can send through to you, or maybe Claire or Jane could send through to you a report that was done by the King's Fund a couple of years ago, which is quite helpful. I think it's probably the most accurate overview of the deal that I've seen. And the King's Fund came to live with us for a year. They spoke to lots of residents, they spoke to lots of staff from the NHS and from the council and from housing and other organisations, just to find out what made it work, why was it a success, and how would it made a difference to the outcomes for local people. And that should be the starting point. Also, thanks, Leslie. Leslie's posted it in the chat for those of you that are interested in it. There are some videos as well accompanying it. The other thing is, I don't know if you've also read The Community Paradigm, which is reading it on your holiday, Leslie. That's commitment. There's also a useful report called The Community Paradigm, Unlocking Community Power, and that's been produced by New Local, which is a think tank that I chair. And what we're trying to do, we're working with a network of about 70 councils. I'm not sure if either Coventry or Warwickshire are members actually, but really brilliant network of people who want to think about creative ways to unlock community power and learning from each other to do it nationally as well. We've got members in Scotland and in Wales now. So it really is starting to build ahead of steam, even more so since COVID struck. So a little bit of my background. So I worked in the community and voluntary sector before I became a public servant, and very passionate about person-centred, community-centred public services throughout my whole career. That's kind of been what's driven me. Adopted as a child, and so public services literally saved my life, and so always kind of focused on how do we get better public services, more connected around the person and the family. And also kind of less bureaucratic and more accountable to local people. That's my kind of mantra, what drives me. So a little bit about the deal. We started in 2011, going back in time. So I'd been at a much smaller council, and I've been chief exec at Chorley. And we'd done some work around what we called at that point circles of need. So basically people would come into the contact centre or ring up or approach one of the public sector bodies, whether it was a GP or a school, with an issue or a problem. And we just processed that problem and dealt with that presenting need, rather than building a relationship with families who needed our support and working differently. And that kind of thinking and mindset has always stuck with me, some of the learning that we got from that approach in Chorley. Moving to Wigan, I was told I couldn't do that in a big metropolitan council, and that you can't do all the listening that you did to staff, because again, one of the things I've always done is systematized listening. I've always worked with ethnographers and anthropologists throughout my career to try to help to reshape public services based on actual evidence that we get from local people, local citizens, and not just what we think people want, and not just kind of, I don't like the term social prescribing, but not what we think they need to be prescribed, but very much rewiring ourselves to listen differently. So when I came to Wigan, one of the first things we did was we listened to frontline teams about some of the issues and the barriers they were facing as social workers in children's services, in adult social care, people trying to work in reforming the environment, economic development, you name it. We did this systematic listening. We called it listening into action. So it was us, it was leaders, it was myself, the leader of the council, the cabinet, the management team, listening to frontline teams, and not just doing it as a one-off exercise and then nothing happens, but we did it every 2 weeks. So we did it every 2 weeks with groups of around 150 frontline teams, and it took a while to build up the trust, for people to think that they could say anything and not be sacked, and that we would, more importantly, we would act on what we heard. So I think that's really important. How do you systematize listening? The other thing that I noticed was we had lots of strategies in Wigan. We had something like around 100, more than 100 strategies, none of them connected. We didn't have a corporate strategy. We didn't have anything around vision, values, behaviours. We didn't have anything for the system, because with the demise of local strategic partnerships, we'd thrown all that away. So again, my background is policy and strategy, and I always think if you've not got a good and consistent strategic framework to tie things into, then you're never going to achieve anything. All you're going to do is do random projects, pathfinders, and individual programmes that don't connect around the citizen and the place. So we did some work with a woman called Hilary Cottam. And again, I don't know if you've read Hilary's fantastic book, Radical Help. Again, I don't know if somebody could post a link to that maybe in the chat, but it really is a worthwhile read. And basically, Hilary came into Wigan. She helped us to think about how we were working in a very disjointed way with families. So we took 25 families whose children were on the edge of being taken into social care. And we recognised that we were doing so many things wrong. We mapped out all of our interactions across all public services over a 10-year period and found we were spending between $250,000 and $500,000 per family per year. And at the end of that year, their outcomes were worse than they were at the beginning. And what we were doing was repeatedly assessing them, referring them through the system, not knowing very much about them apart from the presenting need, and not really helping to change their lives for the better, and definitely not building on the assets and the strengths that they had as a family. So we learned lots of lessons from that. We also, at the same time, we're doing some work with Nesta on a Creative Councils project with older people in adult social care. And again, we were doing the same there, and we were expensive, costly as a social care service. We found our hospital was doing similar things, and our GPs as well, and schools were doing the same thing. So we thought we need to, we also had no money. So we thought these three things, three corners of the triangle, kind of helped us to think we've got to really rethink our role as an organisation and as a partnership. So our role should be to release the assets that we have in our local place. And for us, that was our 323,000 people who lived in the borough of Wigan. I know Coventry and Warwickshire will be much bigger than that. We've got lots of economic strategies, but nothing around connecting local people to those opportunities, nothing specific. And we've got some very kind of sounded wonderful and airy-fairy community strategies, but they didn't drill down into action on the ground, and nobody really knew how they were going to come to fruition. So we created this strategy, which was at the heart of everything we did. It was our financial strategy, it was our corporate strategy, it was our community strategy. It was called The Deal, and it's a handshake that symbolises it. And me and my graphic artist just designed it one rainy lunchtime in Wigan in my office and just said, it's just a partnership, it's a social contract. It's very simple. Our part is that we will freeze council tax. So we froze council tax for 10 years because we didn't want the impact of austerity to hit our citizens. So that meant for every family around £500 extra a year. If we'd have put council tax up in the way that everyone else in Greater Manchester was doing, it would have cost families around £500 extra a year when they could least afford it. So we also developed integrated place-based teams, which I know are happening in Coventry. I don't know about Warwickshire. And we got teams to work together across housing, police, mental health, GP practices, schools, and worked again around individuals and families. We did risk stratification intensively, so we knew where people lived and we could identify support before they actually needed it. So in terms of unplanned hospital admissions, in 1 year we reduced unplanned hospital admissions within a risk stratified group of around 4,000 by 30% by proactively reaching out to GPs. We also had this policy strategy, if you like, of putting people who were on the front line in a position of power. So we passed power to them, and we gave people permission to innovate within these place-based teams to come up with the right solution for the people they were supporting, rather than, you know, standing there with the tick box and assessing and referring again, because we knew we were spending 80% of our time and money on that and it wasn't working. We were telling people, you're not poor enough, you're not ill enough, you know, to access our services, you're not in enough debt, go away, get worse, come back, and then we will allow you, because we've raised the thresholds, we will then allow you to access our menu of services which we think you need.
Donna, you've gone on to mute.
Sorry about that. Don't know how I quite did that. So public service reform was at the heart of the deal, really focusing on the management of demand in the system, rather than many organisations focus their strategies on an economic strategy predominantly, which is around growth. But we matched growth with reform. So it was a balanced strategy, and we put citizens at the heart of it. So as well as having the listening sessions for staff, we had listening sessions with communities, again every 2 weeks in a different community, where the leader, and they'd never seen the leader, he'd been the leader for 27 years, but he'd never actually been seen by people in the locality, and it meant a lot for him to go out there and listen with his cabinet and the management team, and we did it systematically, and I think we learned a lot, and we changed as a team by doing that. We became more humble, but we also became more bold, because we knew, so we kind of had this bold humility as a cultural thing that ran right through the organisation, me and the leader, right to frontline teams. We did lots around organisational development too. So we did something called the Be Wigan Experience, which was hosted by and it was a cross-sector thing across the NHS and council and housing, everybody who worked, DWP, everyone. And it was around the values that we hold dear as public servants working in the place. So our values were about being positive, being accountable to local people, and being courageous, because we knew if we carried on doing the same old thing, our services would fall over, they would collapse due to the demand, the pressures of demand. We really focused on healthy life expectancy. That was our core outcome. And we managed, by investing 13 million into 500 community projects over a 10-year period, we managed to reverse that decline in healthy life expectancy, which is really unusual. And I know Coventry are a marmot city, aren't they? So you're probably doing stuff that's, you know, really great. I'd be keen to hear what you're doing. But we did lots to kind of invest in community infrastructure and societal infrastructure, particularly in deprived wards where there were very poor outcomes. And at the end of the 10 years, we've managed to add an additional 7 years of healthy life expectancy in the most deprived wards. And the King's Fund report talks about exactly how we did that in a lot more detail. But it was a basis of working differently with the community and voluntary sector, starting from a foundation of trust rather than mistrust, where often you'll find that organisations give the community and voluntary sector a tiny amount of money and spend more money on monitoring that tiny amount of money and how it's spent, whereas the great big foundation trust down the road overspends every day and just gets given more money. So, you know, we felt we had to change that, make it a trusting relationship, and ask the community and and the sector to come up with different ideas. So the old tired municipal ideas that we had about how to prevent poor mental health, poor physical health. We worked with, so a couple of examples, we had a farm called Green Slate Community Farm, tenanted by a farmer who died. We were approached by a community group. It took 2 years for the council to make this decision. They wanted to set it up as a drug and alcohol rehabilitation project where people would go in and work on the farm basically as therapy. And we were like, oh, we can't do that. It's tenanted farm. We're getting an income from this farmer. We can't, and the property people were saying, we can't change that. That's we've got to get the good value for council tax payers' money. But we weren't doing that kind of cross organisation thinking about, well, what's the cost? What are we spending on mental health, drug and alcohol recovery and mental health support? And it was huge. So we thought, this is a really good investment. Let's give it to the community. Let's support them with grant funding and help them to make it a sustainable project. Similarly, we did work with Wigan Warriors, big rugby town Wigan. And they came up with an idea around supporting people either with or without dementia. So it wasn't a stigmatised service. But, rather than sitting them in a day centre with people they didn't know or didn't like, let's connect them to something that they all love, which is sport, and rugby in particular, and get them to meet some of the players, some of the older players, bring the programmes in, have a talk, have a conversation every day about rugby and about the club and about what connects them, which is the things that they love, really asset-based working. We had a sexual health contract that we were about to relet, and we relet it on the basis of the principles of the deal. So asset.
You've muted yourself again, Donna.
This is really weird. I'm not pressing anything. I'm so sorry. Thanks for that, Leslie. So, you think about it from the point of view of, say, a young girl, 14, going in for the morning after pill into a pharmacy. What happens there? The pharmacist just dispenses the morning after pill. There is no conversation. There is no kind of thinking around. Yeah. So we called it different conversations. We had a different conversation toolkit that we developed with an anthropologist. So we don't just keep having these linear needs-based conversations. We think whole person, whole life course. And yeah, so we embedded it, and it really has made a big difference. It wasn't about how many of you worked in organisations where you get a new chief exec or a new leader and they change the strategy. So again, I'm working in Birmingham at the moment. They've had, in the last 4 years, they've had 5 chief executives and they've had 5 different strategies. So I think the thing that the King's Fund identified about the deal was, first of all, clarity of purpose. We were really clear what we were there to do. It was public service reform writ large across every single person who worked there and every single person who lived there. It was a new social contract. It was about doing things differently, doing things together, not doing things to people. And then the second thing the King's Fund said was it was a constancy of purpose. So instead of just, chopping and changing our plans and having projects and programs and pilots are here, there and everywhere, we sustained the momentum by having this at the heart of everything that we did over a long period of time. And I remember teachers, so head teachers are one of the most difficult groups to engage, because schools are almost now, especially with academisation, almost like little businesses, aren't they, separate? But they absolutely love the deal. I remember at a head teachers conference, the moment I realised we'd struck gold with the deal was they said, do not change this, keep this. We had a deal for children and families. We had a deal for adult social care and health. This is the future, and they really bought into it. They signed up to it. Market traders signed up to it. So it was a whole place endeavour, and it really worked well. So again, if you're interested in this stuff, the community paradigm work is again very much around building on the beliefs of Elinor Ostrom. Don't know if you've come across Elinor Ostrom. She was the first woman to ever win a Nobel Prize. And she was an economist, but she believed in a concept called the commons, around how do you build a sense of purpose in a place. And it's by building up, working with local people to build that sense of common purpose. So at New Local, that's what we've built our whole philosophy and thinking on. And we've developed this thing called the community paradigm, where we thought that the state, created obviously in the 1940s, the welfare state, done some amazing work. Thank God we've got it. But at the same time, it's become incredibly bureaucratic and remote from systems locally. So we've got, you know, the most centralised state in the whole country, I think, apart from North Korea perhaps, but everything is incredibly centralised. You look at other countries like Germany, for example, we've got more federal models. We've got a very much a kind of top-down approach, which doesn't work in my experience for local communities. So it's good that you're part of an integrated care system. It's a real opportunity to shake things up. So we feel the state and obviously the social care issues in the state. I don't think the state is the vehicle to resolve the issues in social care. I think we need a complete redrawing of what the role of social care is. So obviously you've got the state paradigm. Then obviously in the 80s there was the market paradigm where everything was outsourced and marketisation was seen as being a good thing. And you've got organisations like Capita and Carillion and Serco set up. You know, and again, I don't think private sector is the right solution. It's crashed and burned, hasn't it, many times over, especially with test and trace and things like that. So we're arguing for a new community paradigm, which takes the best of the state, but makes it much more accountable to local communities, co-designed and commissioned by local people. So that's at the heart of the community paradigm. And just a bit of a challenge back to you around your role. And you know, I think you're in a really powerful position to challenge the way that Coventry and Warwickshire are working around the citizen. And, you know, maybe you could come up with a thought leadership piece for them to have a think about, you know, what needs to change. Why are they not building on some of the principles of the Wigan deal? And the hardest thing, I think, is to turn the theory into practice. And you will have different strategies in probably Coventry and Warwickshire, but this is an opportunity to learn from each other and from other places and come up with your own community paradigm, if you like, making sure it's embedded in the ICS from day one. A real opportunity, I think. So thanks for listening. Hope that's okay. Sorry if I keep muting myself.
That's great. Thanks, Donna. So let's open it up for questions or comments. So if anybody just wants to raise their hand, go on in with a comment or question to Donna while we've got her with us.
Got to make sure I haven't muted everybody.
Or you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Diane, please come on in.
Just wanted to say thank you really to Donna for what she's just said, but also for it's not the first time I've heard her. I heard it at the locality conference, and you genuinely, and I really mean this, gave us a spur to be a very different organisation. We were completely inspired by what you said, and we've gone on to do lots of different things that we didn't believe we could do as a community organisation. I think, and I think what's so powerful about the Wigan deal is it isn't just a piece of paper or a story. It's proven and it's there. And I think what I find frustrating is the way we still have to try and make the case for it, and yet there's plenty of evidence out there. So we waste a lot of time trying to demonstrate through evidence that we could do things differently, and yet there are real life examples out there. And I think that's the biggest frustration for me. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Diane. Can I come back on that? Is that all right? I mean, I completely agree. And I remember whenever we've been evaluated and kind of people want to come in and look at the impact, we tell them about the impact, but then they say, well, where's the proof? Where's the statistical evidence? So it's really hard to do. I've kind of given up with that now, I'll be honest. And I think we can spend all our lives trying to find the statistical evidence, and you can never find out whether going to that mental health support project was the thing that saved someone from killing themselves. You're just never going to make that empirical connection, are you? So I think it's more important that we go with our gut feeling, and also, I mean, the evidence that you've got there from Radical Help that things desperately need change, that healthy life, you know, Michael Marmot's work, that healthy life expectancy is going the wrong way for the first time in 50 years. So I think the danger is not doing something. The danger is not doing something. So I always present that as being the alternative. If we carry on and you look at that trajectory and that graph of doom, we are all doomed.
Thanks. Gail, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, Donna. I've heard you speak before. I'm Gail Quinton. I'm the Deputy Chief Exec for the City Council, and I just wanted to reinforce the point, and I'm really glad you said it, about the importance of the strategic framework, because I feel that is what we have been doing over the last few years. We have been a marmot city. We are really trying to push One Coventry partnership. Chris Ham, who has been with the integrated, our independent chair of integrated care system. So I think I feel more optimistic that we've got a strategic framework which helps us push in the way we want to go. I feel more optimistic that we've got some really good examples that how we're trying to build Anchor Alliance, more place-based approaches. We've got a strong partnership of schools. We're trying to take transfer the learning into primary care and use similar models, because GPs and head teachers, to my mind, are very, very similar. I do think that we have, through our combined health and wellbeing, our year of wellbeing, we've got some really good examples. I do think about some of our city council services. I can see Jim on the call, what we've done with housing and homelessness, and really trying to shift that into more partnership working and think about at all levels. I can see Debbie and Valerie on the call in how we're trying to build much more of our model for how we're looking at really being bottom up. And I can also see Diane and other comments about, but that doesn't translate at the point where we need it to. So I completely get that. And I think this is why these conversations really matter, and we need to see everybody as part of it. But I do think we're in a good position, and I do think coming out of COVID puts us in an even stronger position, because we're not starting the framework. We're at that point of how do we really get culture, behaviours, that mobilising around that continued vision. And I think that's the bit that's the most exciting. And for me, I think the trick has to be how we actually enable people just to get on and do it in their bits, having the confidence it will join up and it will fit, because I think we've done enough of the strategic framework to say, let's crack on and just get some of this stuff done, to be perfectly honest. So, and I'm more than happy to understand what that means and how we do it, but some of it is about just creating that space. So thank you, it's really helpful.
Oh, that's great. Thanks a lot, Gail. And I think I would say 75% of the deal was organisational development. Not organisational development, actually more system organisation, you know, across the system, across all organisations, and you know, those experiences. And we made them not just a boring workshop, but like an interactive thing, and they were hosted by frontline staff and by community representatives. So it wasn't a kind of, you know, people being instructed to do something. It was about and we also, again, designed it with Robin Farrow, the anthropologist, in mind. So he's brilliant. I really recommend him. If you've not met him, Gail, he's absolutely inspirational guy. Freelancer, really good.
Leslie's got her hand up.
Hi Donna, thank you, and I think we get to see you again on the Health Equalities programme soon, because we have our Coventry and Works group there. And I'm coming from the NHS side, and obviously we are starting to work in an integrated way in Coventry, which is really exciting, and lots of my colleagues here today who are from across the council and NHS starting to know that each other exist, which is a good starting point. And we really want to do this, and I guess a lot of people here are at that kind of middle manager level, and we have, you know, the enthusiasm, and we really want to see things being different for the future. And it's really great to hear Gail speak from a very senior executive level that's the direction of travel as well. In Wigan, how did you sort of spread that way of working into other statutory services and public sector, and how did you go about that, and what was the response like from the NHS?
Thanks very much, Leslie. Can I be really honest? And I hope Chatham House rules, if that's okay. It took a while to get buy-in from the FT. When it became famous, suddenly it was their idea, actually. But it took 5 years of hard slog. But GPs, frontline GP and the CCG were the same. The CCG had this very controlling kind of mindset at the time around commissioning had to be done in a darkened room in the CCG. You know, and it was all segmented, separate services. It wasn't around the reality of how people live their lives and early intervention, prevention, community assets. It was, I will write a service specification and I will let it, and it was just, drove me around the bend. And eventually they put me in charge of the CCG. So we did a bit of shaking up there. But frontline GPs, I think, were amongst the first to get it. And actually clinicians within the trust on an individual level, they got it. I think there's a real kind of hierarchy and sovereignty of organisation here thing. It's great that you're here, and you're obviously, you get it. And I think more people in the NHS are starting to get it. I think the ICS guidance itself is very much focused on community assets, isn't it? Empowering community, listening, thinking, life course, co-produced stuff. So, you know, brilliant. But this is going back 10 years, so it wasn't as popular then. But, you know, teachers, head teachers, frontline teachers, GPs, people know if they have people coming into the surgery with the issues that they're coming in with, they know that it needs change, huge change, and that can only happen at the system level.
Tim?
Thank you.
Right, Leslie.
Yeah, that really fits in with how we're working at the moment. So we're doing something around long-term conditions, and a GP who is holistic and sees the person with their life and their issues around them knows that the biggest problem for that person is probably what's going on in their family, not their diabetes. Whereas if you look at it from a diabetes perspective, you know, we're setting up a new diabetes pathway, and it feels a bit like, are we going about this the wrong way, guys? So I think we have a journey to go on, and that's why these sort of networking events and the HEP program and things like that are really, really beneficial to sort of start that shift, that culture shift.
Absolutely right. I've just been on a call with Chris this morning, actually, Chris Ham, about data, and how ICS is the kind of data that ICSs need. And again, the data that we have been used to seeing is very much around KPIs, individual KPIs, isn't it? Rather than population health type joint strategic needs assessment data. And, you know, I think that's, so I chair a board of the hospital board in Bolton, and we've stopped doing that now. We've started to focus on places. We've started to focus on BL3, for example, which is our more deprived area. Think about all the assets and the services that we run in BL3. And this came from a presentation we had from our community outreach midwife who told us that, you know, 90% of stillborn babies and very low birth weight babies were born in BL3. And yet we had exactly the same services on offer in BL3. In fact, there's less GPs in BL3 than there are in other parts of the town. So, you know, very much data driven around place, locality, outcomes, and then you can design services in a different way, co-produced with local people with lived experience.
Tim, can I invite you to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Donna, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about investing in communities and what some of the sort of the challenges were around that. And I was really interested in the bit around sort of sharing expert advice with local voluntary organisations, because one of the things that I sort of witness and see in my interactions with voluntary organisations in the city is that sometimes what they lack is like a really good administrator or somebody that really loves systems and processes, which in my experience is the local authority has some amazing people that love spreadsheets and systems and processes. And if we could share some of that love with our voluntary sector colleagues, that, you know, they're amazing at doing the do, you know, and they're great at engaging with local communities and local people and representing their communities, but sometimes they're not very good at spreadsheets. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. I'm not very good at spreadsheets either. So one of the things that we did, we learned so much by working with the people who were running the 500 projects and about the complexity of how on earth do you get to navigate? And some of the groups still contact me now and say, how on earth do I navigate the complexity of property versus adult social care versus finance? They don't work together. They don't believe in us. It's all barriers put up to stop us accessing services. So one of the things we did was we introduced a week volunteering time for every employee. So they had a week to be able to go and work with a community group of their choice to help them with spreadsheets, to help them with HR advice and support. And they built a relationship with them very often that they get then extended into supporting them in their own time. So the council paid for a week's volunteering time. I don't know if that's something that's been considered in your neck of the woods, but it really did work. So we had, you know, local men's walking football groups, men's sheds. We had young women's kind of eating disorder services that were supported by women who worked in the council's finance team who'd had eating disorders, but who connected with that group and, you know, helped them, supported them with all sorts of kind of technical advice. So that's one thing you could consider.
That's great. Thanks, Donna.
I can't see anybody else's hands, but anybody else hand up or come straight in if you'd like to make a comment or question.
I just have a question for Donna. Donna, I was interested in the concept around engagement with families. Did you mention about up to 100 families that you engage with, and also the frontline staff? What did that look like? Because I was just wondering, in this world of sort of COVID and different ways of engaging with communities, were there barriers around sort of digital communication with families? Because obviously there may be English may not be their first language, or there could be issues around learning disabilities, all those sorts of things. How did you overcome those barriers?
Yeah, thanks very much, Manjit. No, it was pre-COVID, I'm afraid. So we didn't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they've now moved to doing the staff listening into action online, which is not as good really when you've got 100 people on a call. It's really, really difficult. So they're much better done in a face-to-face context, but it was 25 families that we work with as part of with Hilary Cottam, and it's again, if you're interested at reading Radical Help, we'll show you how we did it. So basically all public servants who engaged with those 25 families, and it was to learn about how we needed to change children's social care for the future. We found that they were just going in with, as you said, you take your lanyards off at the beginning of the meeting. So we got people to take the lanyards off. So they weren't the police officer in that. They were they were Rob or whatever the person's name was. And they built relationships with those people and they helped people to, again, navigate the complexity of public service systems. We took more, what some people would describe as more risky decisions, because people, we started from the kind of angle that we wanted to keep families together. That was the main thing, and we would put in place the support that was needed, whether it was mental health, drug and alcohol recovery support, whether it was a job, income, pay, writing off a debt on a council house that hadn't been paid, just to enable the family to get themselves back on their feet. And we compared and contrasted the cost and the outcomes for the child going into social care. So it was that kind of different way of thinking. In terms of engagement with the frontline, with communities, we had these weeks of action in specific areas, in specific neighbourhoods that had been kind of overlooked really. So we would get, a huge kind of clean-up effort, a huge kind of enforcement effort around underage sales and things like that, and licensing. But we'd also do like vaccination uptakes, immunisation uptakes. We'd do health checks. So we would go and, we'd go door to door offering liver scans, for example, in areas with high rates of alcohol consumption. So it kind of not in a Big Brother type way, but in a really supportive kind of neighbourly way. We had 5,000 health champions that were kind of dissipated across the borough as well, and we really worked intensively with them.
Right, so you had so it's volunteers within the community. So those health champions were volunteers.
Yeah, they put themselves forward. Every one of the 500 projects that we funded was paid the living wage. So it wasn't like, it's not a kind of big society type thing where you're just outsourcing public services to the community and voluntary sector. It was very much a kind of coming up with a pluralist, different type of societal infrastructure in a neighbourhood that very often doesn't have much going for it. It might have a GP practice if it's lucky. It might have a McDonald's. It might have a betting shop. It might have a pasty shop, and that might be it. So how do you work with those assets in the place to get, so we did lots of work with Betfred. It's something that you might think, well, why on earth do they work with them? But lots of people struggling with issues would go into Betfred, and the people working behind the counter would know those people, but they wouldn't be working with like the local GP or the local community group that were there to support people. And it's we also work with McDonald's again, so we set up a community football club and a community conversations club with a McDonald's franchisee who was who was care experienced and wanted to do work in the local community but didn't know how to get started. There was a lot of antisocial behaviour in his branch of McDonald's. So it's that kind of different way of thinking about all of the assets in a place.
Yeah, that's just absolutely fabulous. That's most certainly thinking outside the box. With, you know, we would never even think of that, but it's thinking about who do families engage with, and I guess it was McDonald's and as you said, you know, sort of those key places, not to go with the obvious of they would be going to their GP surgery or a family hub. We obviously need to be thinking more creatively. I think that's fabulous. Thank you, Donna, for sharing that. Thank you.
Can I bring Emma in? Emma, who has let us know that in fact she was born in BL3. So certainly come on in, Emma.
Me too.
I love a Lancashire lass. Yeah, I'm listening and I'm thinking of like loads of like the starts of connections that we've already got happening in this space and in some of the other spaces that I'm in. So I should say that I'm a voluntary sector leader. So I'm based at the Law Centre. I'm a programme manager there, and I work on a key project with Grapevine as well. And I'm so some of the things that I'm thinking about are the kind of risk management side of things and how we've never really seemed to be able to properly embrace that in Coventry. We always kind of end up reverting back to the risk associated to hearing from people or people themselves being the leaders. But we're trying, so it's a positive tone. And then I'm kind of relating to some of the programmatized things. I do feel as a voluntary sector leader a bit programmatized to death. So then I'm thinking about like the early help partnership, and I'm thinking we're so on the edge there. We're almost there, like in terms of we've got all the key people, we've done a lot of work, we've made it, but we're still a bit programmatized. We're still not connecting enough to each other as humans and to the voices of residents. And I've just been making some notes before this meeting on my group that I steer as part of that programme, and what I wanted us to do next and how I wanted us to connect more. And then just like another thing I think is like, how do we progress to equalising voices? So it's great that we've got Gail on, who's the chief exec, but it's about everyone's voice being equal, isn't it? And I'm not saying that Gail isn't thinking that, but we just tend to default, don't we, to who's more important, and actually everybody's important. And I feel, I want to say this to people who are here, I feel really respected by people in the local authority, and I feel like I've worked really hard over the last, now it's 7 years in the voluntary sector again, with people that are on this call who do really respect and value me, but I still feel like the equality is not quite right, and I want us to really think about that if we're going to do work like this. And if I'm feeling like that in the voluntary sector, I'm thinking that the voices of the community are even more, a bit further, sorry that was terrible English, bit further from being equal. So how do we do that? How do we unearth that? I kind of have got a lot of notes on projects that I'm already involved in where I think we're on the edge, like we're nearly there. So it's great to hear from you, Donna, and I've heard from you before as well and loved it. How do you move that? Like, how do you just get over that next hurdle? And when I look at the faces on this call, like, there's so many people that I know and I think they are totally up for it, but we've still not jumped in. So it's just like the next bit. But I want to say to everyone on the call that I'm totally up for it, and I want to do. I've got some really cool ideas about the strategic partnership for early help, the stuff that I'm leading on, and I've also got some cool ideas on the Coventry Standard that people have heard me about, which is like simplifying something that we can all stand behind to really push for resident voices and to really hear from residents.
That sounds fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. That's great, Emma. Which school did you go to? We might have gone to the same school.
I went to Little Eva High School.
Oh, I went to Haywood. just around the corner, isn't it?
I know, yeah, it's all close.
I think it's brilliant that you're here, and it's brilliant that you're doing all this stuff. But I think what I find, again, I might be wrong in this context, but is that it is that leap into the connecting everything together and seeing it all as part of the same thing. All the projects are all part of the same thing, and maybe investing more time in organisational development together, including the community and voluntary sector, and doing that kind of listening, different type of listening. Again, I think Coventry in particular has got a reputation for being fantastic at economic development, hasn't it? And spending a lot of time on that, I think. But for me, I always go back to, well, what's the point if our people don't get those jobs? So this is reform is essential, and it's brilliant that you've got that strategic framework in place. It's now moving to doing, and I think this group has got and doing all across the system is in a really powerful position, vis-a-vis the ICS and the two councils. You can come up with a piece arguing for that. I think your objectives kind of lend themselves to doing that, don't they? So don't feel done to. Feel like you are part of the engine to drive this to the next step, I'd suggest. And you're not alone in being, in fact, I think you're probably more advanced than a lot of other places that I'm working with, where they're still arguing amongst themselves about who's in charge. They're not leading from every seat in the room, as you said, Emma, we should be doing. They're all battling about who's in that top dog position. So, I think you're a great group and you can do it, definitely.
Valerie, do you want to come in with your comment or question?
Mine's going to sound really boring and practical compared to Emma's inspiring comments, as always, Emma. In terms of just the real practicality, so you mentioned how, community and voluntary sector organisations were properly remunerated for this work, and the importance of a living wage. And I think this is one of the things we really battle with. How do we fund our sector, especially the really small community groups, to recognise, how important they are? And how do you do that? How did you do that from a very practical point of view, in terms of, you mentioned you didn't increase council tax and you kept it stable. So where do it feels like you need extra dual fund to dual run this? Before you see the kind of the financial benefit? How do you negotiate that, or how did you do that tactically?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we did was we really, again, building on the work we'd learned from Nesta and from Hillary, we stopped doing things that didn't work. But at the same time, we did double run. We had to create the things that people wanted to see in the local area, mainly community run things that were much better than what we were providing and much more affordable. So that's where we managed to make the 160 million savings. We also had a programme of, basically, this sounds a bit horrible and I don't intend it to be, but there were some people who did not get the deal and did not want to get the deal and were quite cynical about it working, and were very anti-community. They thought they wanted to do things, they did want to do doing things too, rather than doing things with. And they were frightened. And I'll be honest, my children's services team was the biggest kind of denier of this different way of working. So we had to have some quite courageous conversations and replace the leadership there to get them to, to a place where they didn't want to hide behind a clipboard. They wanted to engage differently. So we went through the organisation and we said, look, it's a choice. You either kind of buy into this. We want to hear your views. We don't mind scepticism, but cynicism is not an option, really. This is our new way of working. Communities want it, we want it, and some people didn't like it. So we restructured some people out the organisation who didn't have that mindset and didn't have that commitment to working with local people. So we created some money by doing that. We also created a transformation fund corporately, which we invested over time in, and we. So we didn't use reserves. We created something through the savings that we'd made by not funding things that weren't effective, or not funding incredibly bureaucratic, top-heavy management structures. I just couldn't believe it when I started. There were people there who didn't manage any staff on £150,000 a year. People there who didn't manage any services on that amount of money. And it was just custom and practice. There were people who managed one person who then managed 16 people. It was just bonkers. So we delayered and we flattened the structure. We created some capacity and headroom to invest in the community and voluntary sector projects. I hope that's okay. I hope that gives you an overview.
Karen, you've been waiting. Karen Smith.
Thanks. Hi, thanks, Donna. That has been really insightful. I had the privilege of working on a program called Partnerships in Community with quite a few people who are actually on this call, actually. And one of the things we've started to do is to look at more joined up working and integration in the particular locality of the city, with a view of taking lessons and sort of scaling up wider. And quite a lot of what we're doing at the moment is quite organic, it's quite fluid. We're sort of following the approach that you're advocating around sort of building relationships and trust and having sort of conversations at that local level. But I'm sort of interested to learn whether you've got any sort of tips on how we can sort of marry up what we are learning at that local level and sort of working out, you know, ways of working in that more integrated way with that sort of strategic oversight and working in a more integrated level at that strategic level, and making sure that there's cohesion in what I'm thinking of as a messy middle at the moment, so that sort of the warp and the weft are all lined up. How do we tackle that?
That's a brilliant question, that, Karen, and one which taxed us for quite a while. So we had 7 integrated place-based teams that were doing the kind of thing that you've just described, building on the assets in the localities like the Betfred, the McDonald's, the Galloway's Pie Shop, which is famous in Wigan. And we found that the frontline teams really got it and they loved it, and they were just it reminded them of why they'd become public servants. Whatever the job was, they could connect with the community, they were empowered, the rule books were they were, as long as no one died, they were free to do whatever was the best thing to do in that local area. Absolutely fantastic, particularly the police. I think the biggest lessons came into the police actually, rather than into the council, but really brilliant learning. We then found there was a kind of, and senior people got it as well, and there was the strategy agreed as a kind of strategic framework of the deal across the partnership we had, and across the council and the NHS. We then had the frontline team, but we found often there was a sticky middle bit where we thought everything was fine at the top, we thought everything was okay at the bottom, but there were people sending each other solicitors' letters and locked in hand-to-hand combat in the middle, and it became quite territorial. But so that's why we worked intensively with the middle, well, with all layers around the OD, around behaviours, and tried to move away from projects and programmes, and into systematising this as the way whether you work in a contact centre, whether you're emptying the bins, we're all ethnographers. We're all there to serve people, we're there as servants, public servants, rather than, providers of very limited and restricted services that people have to get on bended knee and jump through hoops to access, and then they can access what we think they want rather than what they actually want. So, I don't know if that helps at all. But that's the kind of thinking that when it took a while, that middle, that sticky middle, it took a while to get all levels right. But the most impact, the best bit was the front line. I used to love going seeing the integrated teams. They were the best, absolutely brilliant, inspiring people.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Donna.
Anybody else want to make a comment or a question? We've got time if there's anything else. Donna, I guess for myself, I guess resonating just with something you said in the middle of that last section about, so why wouldn't you? Obviously you're talking to a group of people that are considering about, have either jumped in or are teetering on the edge or are pushing at the boundaries. But I guess if I'm absolutely candid, I meet some people who aren't convinced, and I consider myself a leader wherever my job is, and I have an influence and an ability to lead my own practice and hopefully those of others. But I wonder if you can provide any further insights or about how to encourage or facilitate sort of those candid conversations about what our real barriers to working differently might be?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the real detractors and kind of, because there's always cynics in any organisation, and we used to call them the vampires. So we said we had, cheerleaders, people who are really passionate about, as you all seem to be on this call, cheerleaders for this different way of working and public service reform. Then you have people who are really passionate, whatever their job is, they're passionate about it, and they love working with citizens differently. Then there were people who would describe as sleepwalkers. So they would come and they would just get through the motions of the day, and they would do, they do a good job, but they weren't really putting that passion and energy and creativity into it. Again, whatever their role was. And that would be around, 40% of the workforce. This is international research, not mine. And then you will get the kind of 10% of detractors, who we called vampires. So we had cheerleaders, sleepwalkers, and vampires, people who would actively try to undermine the organisation they work for, or undermine the mission, who spoke negatively and badmouthed the whole strategy and the whole approach, and just didn't want to be part of it. So, those are the people we had to have hard conversations with about, do you want to really be on this bus with us, or do you want to get off and get on another one? Because this is where we're going. And I think having those hard conversations from leaders right through the organisation at every level, and also, speaking truth to power upwards is really important as well. And saying, that person in social care, they're blocking me from changing things. Can you help me? That kind of diagonal slice of people who work right through at all levels, and trying to get that confidence that you will back people who are speaking truth to power. If they're in the community and voluntary sector, if they're, frontline sweeping the streets, whatever, if they can see that there's something that needs to be changed and it's not changing, and yet they've tried, then I think the system backing them is really important. And we said, we will back you. If you want to make change happen, we will back you. So, and that's quite unusual, because we operate in a very risk-averse climate, don't we, where, these are the rules, you stick with them. If you break the rules, whether the rules are rubbish or not, you're out. And so we turned that on its head. We made it much more permissive, much more creative environment and culture to work in.
Thanks. Diane.
Going back to what Valerie said about investing in that community so that they could move on, and the point that was just made by Donna, I don't think that the people on this call are the cheerleaders. They get it, and that wherever in the public sector they are and the community sector. I don't think that they will appreciate how hard it is as a community organisation when you meet those negative people, and how damaging it is to our confidence. You just think, because you can only do so much. We seem to make massive progress, as we have done through COVID. And then we meet huge blockages in other parts of the council that take up a huge amount of our energy, and not just our time, but our energy to do things differently. And it is very difficult. And I will say this, and people have heard me say it, there's been some fantastic relationships and some fantastic progress made over the last 18 months, but there are still some very, very difficult corners of where we work. We've been trying to seek planning permission, which is how we generate our income, for 20 houses on a piece of land we own, which is to create affordable homes, which the council want. And Jim on here will tell you that we've consulted on that. And we are still waiting to hear from February of 2020 to progress the planning permission from the council. And it's just so frustrating, because there are so many positive things, but you just sometimes think, oh, it's just too hard, put it in the too hard box.
I mean, don't lose the will to live, Karen, because honestly, we need you, Diane, sorry. And I think if we can, I mean, there's people maybe on this call who can unblock the blockage. I don't know. But that's what comes from listening, isn't it? It's picking up on what you've just said and thinking, right, well, why is this happening? And sometimes you need other people to unblock it for you. But that don't stop speaking truth to power.
I think the thing is, it's about that you can always find a reason not to do something. What we need to find is the reason that we will do this. You can always find a reason not to do something, but we've got to change that thinking.
Thanks for that, Diane. Andrea, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to back Diane on that last point. So, Diane, I think you'll probably agree that I've been in that trench with you and Sharon too, and it's really demoralising, isn't it? And we need to try and find a way of this using not so much energy, I think. I just didn't want Diane's point to be only Diane's point, because I've experienced that as both an officer inside, but also as an officer trying to help Diane, and I've witnessed it firsthand, and it's kind of heartbreaking. I don't want to put, that sounds really melodramatic, but it doesn't take much to knock your duck off, to use a nice northern expression. I don't know how, I'm not sure how Diane does keep going. I think it's because she's some kind of superwoman, but I didn't want that point to kind of get lost, because it's this sort of stuff that eats away at culture change. I think we need to kind of name it and place it and try and tackle it.
I think it's...
Diane, I hope you don't mind me jumping in on your point there.
You're not alone, Andrew, I think, in this. And I think, a lot of technical departments like planning and highways and property and finance sometimes, and procurement, sometimes just don't get community stuff. They don't understand it, and they don't see the value of, so that there'll be no assessment done of getting those flats built. There will have been no assessment done around the overall cost saving to the council. It will be a very technical, linear silo of a planning decision, and the fact that it's not been explained to you is just not good enough. So, I think that whole, thinking as a corporate council is really important when you're working with the community and voluntary sector, and very often that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I know, Donna, you were kind enough, we had this conversation when I came to visit you in Wigan. It's the single most heartbreaking thing, I think, of working in public sector, trying to get that corporate think. And Diane's right, every single one of us on this call is all of the same mind. It's how we shift the others that's the tricky bit. And I know you said you did some corporate removing and bloodletting in Wigan, and I'm not suggesting we go down that road, but there is something about get on the bus. I think you might be. Well, I was just trying to be polite, Jane. I was just trying to be terribly polite. I think it might be. Yeah. It might be.
All right, but thank you. Sorry, did someone trying to?
Yeah, sorry, it was me. I just think also Donna's made the point 2 or 3 times during her speech about our power as a collective. And I think we have met, but we haven't really stepped into our power as a collective or tried to use it. And her remarks have really made me think about, do we do a thought piece? Where do we take our energy? Because it's a bit, we are of a mind, but what are we doing collectively to cause that to have influence? We're meeting and talking, but what are we actually practically doing? So let's have a think about that.
Yeah, it's a huge, Claire, I think it's a huge responsibility actually, because what I found last year when we were really in the trenches with COVID was when the going got really tough, I could use my connections to get individual improvements for people who were having difficulties. And sometimes I just had to do that, because morally you feel when you know you could do that, it's very hard not to. But sometimes I think that undoes some of the other things we're trying to do. And also I constantly think when I do that, and some people on this call I've done that to, by the way, I just think I'm thinking to myself, but how am I going to get this to be the way that we always do it? But in the moment, you're trying to activate that individual change for someone. So I'm kind of resonating now with what you're saying, Claire, and thinking, how do we, like, if we encounter an issue or a problem like that, how do we bring it together to use our voice? And I know you were thinking also about wider than that, but yeah, there's a bit of a responsibility there in being together with people that really resonate with doing things differently and are prepared to make changes for you. But how do we then scale that up, review it, understand it, or learn from it quickly and in real time for the benefit of citizens?
I'm just wondering if one of the ways of framing it is to consider the opportunities for Coventry and Warwickshire to work in a more connected and open way with citizens. You know, what or whatever you call it in Coventry and Warwickshire, what are the opportunities, what benefits will it bring in terms of service outcomes and people outcomes and, you know, organisational cohesion and empowering frontline teams, but then also highlighting the barriers currently that are stopping you. So it might be the attitude of the planning team. You know, it might be the fact that you encounter people who just don't understand it and don't undertake that cost benefit analysis as a corporate team across the NHS or council. You know, I think highlighting opportunities and barriers in a thought leadership piece I think it would be really, really powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
Blair, I'm aware you've been waiting. Come on in.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Donna, as well. Really, really insightful conversation, so appreciate it. The one thing that I was just reflecting on, especially from the last conversation there, is any kind of tips or strategies you may have used in helping different partners to either, one, be able to see the issues as not a single entity or organization's issue, but that they are actually a system issue, and to jointly own those issues and challenges, or on the flip side of that, whether it is kind of taking a more kind of appreciative approach that would potentially be more beneficial. So you know, by looking at what is the best way or best optimum outcome, you're actually kind of designing out those issues. So rather than you know, emphasizing the issue, try and just design them out by focusing on the optimum. Which kind of angle did you come at it from, or did you have to do a pincer move to try and tackle some of the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an overnight thing, this, Blair. It took, you know, it's still iterating now as we speak. So it was very much around, you know, more of like a belief system that we embedded, that we all, you know, the belief system was that the first point was if we carry on doing what we've always done, we're going to fail because it's not working. It's hugely expensive and it's ineffective. And people don't trust us because we operate from the principle of, the first point is, we are an organisation that you need to prove that you're good enough to benefit from. And who wants to be part of something like that? It's the same with social care, isn't it? You know, that basically we've designed a system nationally, which we've kind of built in almost like a Department of Work and Pensions type culture, that you've got to be bad enough in order to get it, and then when you get it, it's not particularly great, but that's all there is. There's nothing else. You know, we've got to completely rethink that, and it's been proved that the government haven't got a strategy, have they? You know, the argument's been all about the money rather than what it actually is there to do. And in my book, it should be about producing an equal life for everybody, whatever their ability or disability, and whatever their age. So, you know, it took time. It takes time, and every place is different. What's good for Wigan won't be good for Coventry. You know, I think it's got to be very specific around the place, the culture, the values, and the strategic framework you've already got in place. But I think, you know, I think the best piece of evidence I've read around why do you do this is Radical Help. You know, so Hilary is, don't know if you've read it, Blair, Radical Help. But you can get it online. It's a really good read, and she describes 4 different experiments that she did. One in children's services, which is the Wigan one in adult social care, which is community. Anyway, but they're international experiments that she's done around human-centered design, and that was the evidence base that we really drew on. That plus the Nesta work, and I think the difference between Wigan and where I've worked elsewhere is we've got the politicians and the staff really behind this change thing quite early on, and they realised they couldn't just carry on doing what they'd always done. It had to be a radical redesign, and that's quite hard to get sometimes, to get people to appreciate that, you know, more money will not fix this. If we get a funding settlement that gives us twice as much money, in another 10 years we'll still be struggling if we carry on doing what we're doing now. It's a broken model of public services. Personal view, but, you know, I don't think it's just about the money.
No, the mindset is absolutely critical across the piece, isn't it? So yeah, no, really, really helpful. Thank you.
Rose, can we take you as the final comment or question, please?
That's pressure. I work for the CCG, and one of my tasks as we transition into an ICS is looking at how do we put an engagement strategy in place for the voluntary sector, for patients, and building on that. And we're just sort of kicking off a lot of this work already. And I think it kind of speaks to a previous point rather than the one we've been talking about maybe, but there is at the moment a lot of interest, there's a lot of opportunity to land things if we can develop them, and if we can bring everything together. People are listening at the moment. There's places where this engagement strategy will be signed off by senior people. People will look at it. So there's a real opportunity to bring everybody together, and it's certainly not something that we can develop as a CCG by ourselves. It needs to be led and developed. We're looking at lots of different ways in which we could do it, and I think it's just that kind of open call to how could we link this brilliant work in with what we're doing with everything else, really. So hopefully that's a positive ending. That's question.
That's great. Thanks very much, Rose. And I think it's got to be listening. So rather than just engagement, which is just kind of implies a one-off kind of interaction, you engage with someone and then that's it. I think it's about the whole basis of collaboration and trust. And I would definitely contact Robin Farrow, an ethnographer. It's basically, he will help you design tools and techniques and do training with you around how to get people to listen, whether they're a GP. GPs are good at it, aren't they, most of them? But all public servants very often just do their own little bit, but they don't do it every day. They don't have that kind of mindset around, I might not be perfect in what I'm doing here. I'm going to, the planning officer might think these are the rules, and not really think and listen to Karen and find out what is Karen trying to achieve. Would what Karen's trying to achieve be good for that local community? They're coming at it with a set of rules, and that for me is where change happens, is by changing. And I tell you, the biggest, the hardest bit of transformation I've ever done is in planning, where they come with a very, very fixed mindset. But I think that he did some training with us called Developing the Blank Mind, which is you don't come with assumptions and kind of thinking what people is best for people. You actually actively listen in a very different way, and that to me is what engagement is about. So I'd use anthropology and ethnography in particular, which is about the quiet observation of the study of how people live. Going back to the diabetes example, it's not about creating a diabetes clinic at great expense. It's about thinking about more preventative stuff and treatment based at home and in the community, that I think will make the biggest difference. And again, it shouldn't be like a standalone, as you've said, Rose. A standalone strategy should be part of the broader aspiration for the ICS. So it sounds great.
Thank you very much. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you again, Donna. It's been truly inspirational. I've ordered the book while we've been online. I've been watching some of your videos, and certainly you've encouraged me, and I know some of my colleagues again, to have that kind of bold humility, have some of those courageous conversations. So thanks ever so much for the time that you spent with us today. And I'm going to hand over to Claire now. Thanks, Claire. Just unmute yourself, Claire.
Thank you again, Donna. Donna knows that there was a plan where we were going to move on and do some other things, and if there were a speaker fee, she's more than earned it, because she's really been speaking to us for a while, and it's been great. I think we had a plan for the rest of the session, which obviously we will move on to next time. But I think what I'd really like to think about between now and next time is how we take up Donna's challenge of, how do we use our power? Do we want to write a think piece? How do we want to get some influence flowing? So if there are people in the broader group who aren't in the core organising team for Thinkers and Doers who want to get round the table to do that, please tell us, put it in the chat before the end of the session, and we'll look towards taking that forward. And I think I'm handing on to Natalie, who's going to say a little bit about our next session in October.
Yep, so in our next session, I think part of it will be what we were going to cover today. So that part of it was going to be about taking, I think back in June, we all contributed to a Lucid Spark board about what was on our mind and, you know, what we wanted to work on together and things like that. So we were going to start revisit that board and start having some conversations around the themes that had come out of that and actually how we can move that forward and move it into action. So part of the session will look at that. Hopefully part of that will carry on from what we've heard from Donna today, and I can really feel some energy in the room. So hopefully some of that will come out in those conversations as well. We'll also have hopefully a session run by Adrian, who is Head of Customer Services at Coventry City Council. And again, it ties quite nicely into what we've been talking about today. Adrian's looking at potentially revisiting the customer service offer within the council and really using that to shape the citizen agenda. But she mentions, you know, she's got to get a lot of buy-in for that, and she wants it to be really challenged externally and internally. So I think Adrian's going to come along and talk a bit about that and hopefully get some feedback from the room as well. So hopefully follows on quite nicely from what we've heard from Donna today. So again, and that's just over a month away, so it's not too long. So, you know, fingers crossed we can keep some of that momentum going and have some really good conversations. But I think that's everything, unless anyone else has any closing comments, Claire or Jane or Donna.
I was just thinking of a title for your thought leadership piece. You could call it Moving from Thinking to Doing, something like that, you know, about the opportunities and challenges, but also you know, really, because you're at the right time to be doing this now within the context of the ICS, definitely. It's really, really optimistic.
Thanks, Donna. I think that's fantastic. And hopefully maybe one of our breakout rooms for next time. So thank you. Anyone else? Jane?
I was just going to tell people, obviously we'll send it on an email, but what the date for the next meeting is, particularly for those people who don't usually join the network. Please do feel free to come again to the next session. And I was just going to have a quick look in my diary to find out.
The 19th of October, the next session.
At the same time as this one.
At the same time.
So if you want to pop it in your diaries now, but we will send out an agenda and a link again nearer the time.
And we can leave the chat box open for the next couple of minutes. So anybody wants to put anything in there or put their hands up to help do a bit of strategic thinking around this in the way that Donna suggested, you'd be more than welcome.
Actually, just while we're there, somebody's asked just for some clarification on what a think piece is. Well, no, I think that's really good. I think that's really good because we want to, you know, be real with one another. So let's.
Something really simple that provokes, it's like a provocation really to the system. So it's to every organisation, and it's to try and jolt people a little bit. So it should be a little bit like a kind of, you know, where are we at in terms of the citizen voice within the ICS? What are the opportunities that we could build on, and what are the challenges? So, you know, and starting off from a high point, saying, you know, we're on the brink, as a few people have said on the call, we're on the brink of something amazing. So how do we really turbocharge that last bit? You know, and very specific practical actions of what we need to do. And that's to all leaders and to everyone in the whole system to reflect on within their own organisations. And, you know, that maybe thinking about an organisational development piece, something around listening, you know, something, you know, lots of different things you could think of, but I don't know what you've already got in place, you see. So I've heard some great stuff today, and yeah, well done. And thank you for the invite. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Donna.
Okay, well, we'll leave the chat open, but do feel free to let yourselves go and knock off to the things that will happen. I'm sure it starts at 2 o'clock. So thanks again for the time that you've shared with us today.
Bit of a lockdown one wave, Zoom wave.
See you again.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Manjit.
Bye.
Bye, Tim. Oh, can I get off speaker view? Oh, is it just us now?
It's just us, yeah.
I'll stop.